Think we're good. And one, two, and three. Hey guys, how are you doing? Welcome to Star Wars Timeline. Very happy to have very special guest here, Ian from Wilkins Animations. Hi, how are you doing, man?
I'm good, thanks.
I've been a big fan of yours. I've seen your Dark Empire shorts. As an animator myself, I was completely floored, especially with episode 2. I also saw your interview with Peter Harmy, and kind of like we closed the circle there. I kind of responded to one of the videos, and I think you also replied. It was really cool to interact. So tell us about yourself. What are you all about? What is your work? What is your YouTube channel, and so forth?
All right. Well, basically, I've been into Star Wars and animation for about as long as I can remember. I've always been making little shorts, little messing around with the little VHS camera my dad gave to me eons ago, turning it on and off to try and make some rudimentary stop motion. Ever since then, I've been fascinated by animation, so I studied it in CEGEP, then studied it in university, and well, now I'm working in it in the industry, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
And For the YouTube channel, it's where I can just kind of express myself creatively and just make a variety of projects. But the main focus that I've got right now is the Dark Empire project, which started a few years back,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it's basically been kind of like my tool for trying out new styles, trying out new techniques, and that's part of why the look changes. But it's just a really fun collaborative project I'm doing with a variety of people.
So tell me, your YouTube channel, did it start something as an experimental thing? Did you expect so many people react to your work, or was it just something as a passion project for yourself and just kind of like see what's out there and if people would respond at all?
Really, the latter. Essentially, that ties into kind of what started the whole project.
Mm-hmm.
That I came across the audio book for Dark Empire, and I
Mm-hmm.
was like, "Oh, this is great! It's got all the different voices, even the sound effects were all made. It'd be so easy just to you've got everything done for you. All that is missing is the visuals, and there's even a
Right,
comic to reference." So I figured there's so many YouTube animators out there. Someone's got to have made this, and
right.
well, I found a few small snippets, but no one had actually really sunk their teeth into it. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, well, okay, I'm going to make this for myself, something that for me to watch because I wanted it to exist. And I was like, well, may as well post it to the internet because someone like me might also want to see it.
Right. And
Um,
possibly get a reaction from people.
yeah, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
that's but yeah, so the purpose of the project was really just, I want to put it like out there. I want it to exist because, I had been looking for it and wanted it to exist and I couldn't find it. So I was like, I'll make it then.
Right. And it's really awesome. I mentioned to Peter when we did an interview with him as well. He was so gracious to invite me. It was ended up being such a cool and down to earth guy.
He's a great guy.
And I also told him that I have a degree in animation. I finished the School of Visual Arts here in New York, but unfortunately, I never pursued it. It was like I realized by my graduation year that's not really my passion. I kind of like I became a more of a graphic designer. But anyway, seeing your stuff out there, such a strong voice in animation, it's kind of it was such a balm on my heart. I'm like, oh my god, there's guys out there doing it out there. And it leads me to my first question, which, if you don't mind, I have a set here of very targeted questions to you, and we
That's
can go
fine.
over them. So the first one: there's a lot of EU stuff on there. There's a lot of books as well. But why specifically Dark Empire? What attracted you about that book, and what did you think would translate very well into the animation medium? Because you have comic books, you have animation, completely two different formats.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. Um, well, main reason for Dark Empire really was that there was that full audio drama with everything laid out for me.
Hmm.
I also enjoyed the story. Basically, I
Okay.
discovered it, listened to it through, really enjoyed it. And I was like, well, if everything's here, all the different components are here to the story that I just kind of happened upon and enjoyed, I was like, well,
Might as well, right?
might as well, because I was like, oh, and there's a comic, which is essentially a pre-made storyboard for me,
Hmm. Hmm.
even if it doesn't totally line up perfectly with the audiobook, it gives you like 80% of all the storyboarding work done.
Right.
So I was like, okay, well, this is a project that's basically already started for me, because unfortunately, with a lot of stories that I really love from the EU, such as Heir to the Empire, that trilogy,
Right.
it doesn't have quite the same amount of material to work off of in regards to just stuff that's already done for you, like
Hmm.
voice acting. And there is a comic book, but it's a very, very cut down version of the story. And I
Hmm.
was like, well, that'd just be significantly more work. You'd have
Right.
to hire voice actors, and there's a guy actually out there doing it. He's doing a heck of a job of it. Different style entirely, but it's really like it's a feat to have to do all of that.
Yeah.
And so it's not the most amazing fun answer, but it's because most of the work was already done
No,
for
I
me.
think it's very, very valid. As as a somebody who's been animating for 4 years and made a thesis film, I understand it's as much of a manual labor, literally, as it is a creative process as well. And it's interesting that you mentioned it because my professors taught me in school, like Howard Beckerman, like older gentleman, was one of my storyboarding teachers, and he always stressed how he feels that comic book panels follow their own set of rules of flowing action, and how stories film for film storyboarding and screening should be different. It has its own set of rules, but for you, it actually was as a aid, as a helping tool, which is very interesting to hear. And my second question, also specifically in regards to, let us show the fans what we're talking here, the Dark Empire. I'm pretty sure a lot of fans may not know what this is, and happily introduce. Oh my God, show this again. I would love to see the actual
Oh yeah, I've
issue
got
here.
all of the
That's dope,
books.
man.
This is issue 3, which is what I'm working off right now. I keep the book open and next to me when I'm working
That's
on different scenes.
fantastic. I kind of just stick with the hard copies. I just don't have enough room to do separate issues. But my second question for you is this. Over here. Here we go. How did you approach Cam Kennedy's art style into animation? He has a very specific, very pronounced, stylized penciling and inking and so forth. And in regards to your films, the first short and the second one, even within the span of one film, we're talking about the first episode, the art style has changed and it has evolved. So if you could answer that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I guess I'll do that in 2 parts. First, how I was addressing Cam Kennedy's art style.
Right.
There's out there, there's a lot of people with mixed opinions of it. Some people love it, some people don't. And most people's opinions are fairly valid.
Hmm.
But personally, I love it. I think that
Same
it's
here. I'm
really
a huge fan.
striking.
Yeah.
I think it's really striking. It's really something else. Like I have a fairly considerable comic book collection, and out of all of them, his art definitely stands out and pops and is very memorable.
Hmm.
And I just love the kind of watercolored look on absolutely every panel, and like the just stark colors and the neon pinks and greens and
Hmm.
purple. So yeah, I wanted to approach it like how can I best adapt this without just doing a carbon copy.
Hmm.
And actually, if you look on the channel, there's iterations of the Dark Empire project from before episode 1. There's 2 of them. There's one where I tried to verbatim copy Cam Kennedy's art style, which is probably, I think it's the oldest video on the channel, um,
Hmm.
with very, very cheap animation. It went very quickly, but I wasn't happy with it, and I stopped very quickly, but I posted what I had anyhow.
Hmm.
And then I was like, okay, this won't quite work. If I copy the line art exactly, it's too detailed for animation, at least for me.
Right.
It would be too time consuming. And if I just cheap out and just make it so its mouth that just flap, but everything else is detailed, it won't quite look how I want it to look. Or if the character has to move,
Hmm.
immediately the art style will change. And I wasn't happy with that.
Right.
So I decided to go a complete opposite direction. I decided, okay, forget the art style, forget emulating the comic. I will just purely go off of a different aesthetic. I decided to go off of the holiday special,
Hmm.
um, from the 70s, because I was like, well, that is the only animated reference I really have for the original trio, for Luke, Han, Leia.
Right.
And I figured, well, that's a good place to start. And I did that on paper and pencil and scanning in the sheets and then coloring it digitally. Um, and I quit that one actually purely out of the way I was doing it. It was
Hmm.
too time consuming, and the amount of paper I was using up was getting ridiculous. And I was like, okay, I'm going to invest. And I got myself a drawing tablet. And then that's where episode one started, with the beginning of the episode being aimed at emulating that holiday special style
That's what it was.
fairly
Okay.
close.
Hmm.
Yeah, with it still kind of being like that second test where it was like, okay, kind of the holiday special style, but I wanted to tweak it a bit more, make it a little bit more my own, which somehow ended up making it look kind of like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon,
Hmm.
um, which I realized right around midway through. And so I decided, okay, I want to keep on tweaking it. I want it to be a little bit closer to the art style. So I decided that to emulate the comic best I could, I'm going to go back and I'm
Hmm.
going to just change up the colors, mess with the backgrounds. So the line work at the beginning of the episode doesn't emulate whatsoever, really, the comic, except for a few elements in the background,
Hmm.
but the colors really do.
Right.
And then right around the midpoint was when I decided I want to try and emulate a bit more of the comic. And then you can start noticing the art style shift and the way I draw the characters shift as I was trying to emulate the comic a lot more.
And if I might jump in and just add to what you were saying,
Yeah,
um,
sure thing.
as an animator as well, not only it's beautiful and interesting to see the process, how the episode evolves, how we obviously understand you're working on it, perhaps sporadically. Not everybody has the time to, you know,
Yeah.
crank it out, and just do it in one sitting. It's a laborious process. And what's interesting, you were able to adapt the feeling of the comic. If I could just show our fans here, just a random page, it's virtually impossible, even for a professional full-blown studio, to take all those lines and put them on screen and animate them. And what you have done, I think, very successfully, and I applaud you on that. When you look at the very first part where they just land on the throne world, and all this stuff is happening, and Falcon is flying through, those color palettes grab you. That deceptively simple comic book style that you see, that very simple color palette, but insane amount of details in the backgrounds, and especially all the symmetry in like shapes and inorganic forms, like structures and ships and weaponry. I look at your stuff and it became the comic book animate. And it's not like you said, it's not a repetition, it's not a carbon copy of it. It's your adaptation, but the original source is sort of like emulated through you, and I really love that. And I think you accomplished it 100%.
Thanks. But yeah, basically by the end of the episode, I was trying to get as close to the comic as possible. But once the episode was finished and I was about to start on episode two,
Right.
I realized that that in a lot of those scenes I'd done some artistic choices I wasn't a huge fan of.
Mm-hmm.
The models for the characters were based very much off of the artwork. I tried to copy the comic as closely as possible, with even
Right.
the way the characters were drawn. And that is my opinion, pretty much the only failing of Cam Kennedy's art in the series, is that the likenesses aren't very good.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much, in my opinion, the only failing,
Right.
and that they're not that consistent. And so that small flaw in the comic was kind of being amplified in the animation, because when I
Mm-hmm.
simplified it, it became even more apparent that the characters were changing how they looked in every single shot. So I
It's an
decided I
interesting
had
point.
to, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because it works in the comic,
Right.
because there's all these added details. But when you simplify it down to just where the nose, the eyes, everything is, the discrepancies become really highlighted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, well, I need actual, turnaround, some character sheets.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I did. I tried to stay as on model as possible for episode two,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty much the main change that happened there. I tried
Right.
to stay as consistent as possible for the entire episode.
Mm-hmm.
And right around midway through, when Luke came in, I introduced a new technique, that being 3D animation.
Right. And it became more apparent in the second episode. And I think, in the credits, you list quite a few people who help you, artists who did the 3D designs and, the 3D animation. But it all jives together so well with 2D animation. It's so much simpler. And you have outdone yourself even more so in episode two, which, if you don't mind, I know you have time is precious for you. I just want to lead this
Oh, no
right into
worries.
the third question that I had. What is your overall ambition for this project, now that we're looking into episode 3 that you're working on? And if you could also speak to a little bit adapting to challenges and creating new techniques for this episode 3 that you're working on, if you could give us a snippet.
Oh, absolutely. Ambition for the project as a whole.
Right.
I hope to at least bare minimum make 1 episode a year.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think that's a long time. I think that that's a really short amount of time.
Believe me, I know.
Because while the team is growing, and I'm insanely thankful for that, and I'll lead into it in a moment, the new techniques that I'm hoping will speed things up.
Mm-hmm.
It still takes time, and I still want to give it the right amount of attention. And
right.
Back when I was working on the last 2 episodes, I was in school, so that was kind of my full-time job. Everyone knows university is a lot of work,
right.
And now I have an actual full-time job. So, schedule frankly has barely changed as far as how much time I have on my hands. So I've got the same amount of time to work on the project as I did back when I was in school, because at the end of the day and on weekends.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I won't have summer break though, which is where a lot of the work happened on the last episodes. So that's where I'm trying to find a way to speed things up. And that way is leaning harder into the 3D animation. Because something I'm not too sure if everyone knows, I think it's obvious, but maybe someone that doesn't know animation very well. Luke for the entirety of episode 2 is 3D animated, and then rotoscoped over.
Right. I think you've touched. I'm sorry. I think you've touched on that rotoscoping techniques with Peter as well in his interview, right? You guys went at length about it.
Yeah, I think that we touched on it, and essentially, I think since then there's been some developments that essentially I decided to really lean hard into it, and I hired an absolutely incredible 3D modeler I made character sheets of every main character and a few background characters, and I had him model all of them. Because I'd made Luke myself, but I'm no professional 3D modeler, and it took me forever. And anyone who knows 3D modeling knows that it might look good, but the minute you try to do something with it, if you didn't get the topology just right, if the polygons are wrong, it breaks, and it doesn't look good in motion. Thankfully, it was rotoscoped over, so all those mistakes were invisible, but I wanted something a little cleaner and also pumped out a little faster. The guy I hired, Odin, he's a god at this stuff. He did an amazing job. And so once that was done, I sent it off to another guy. He did an amazing job rigging everything professionally. So now I've got all my main characters and all of a lot of background characters, all 3D modeled, rigged, and I textured them. So I'm going to be able to basically animate the entire episode in 3D, because I've always done the ships in 3D. But now also the characters and very rudimentary backgrounds that I'm just going to have blocks here and there and cylinders there to represent where things will go, because I'll just paint them in. But yeah, I'm hoping I'll animate the whole thing in one pass in 3D, which I'm hoping will be a lot faster, because I just do the keyframes. And then once all that's done, rotoscope over all those keyframes and then do all the in-betweening by hand.
Nice. I looked at I saw the shorts, I think, about the time when each one came out. Back then I didn't even consider the idea of doing my own YouTube channel. Like, I wasn't into this whole thing of viewing channels regularly on YouTube or subscribing to people. I just saw your pieces. And what really grabbed my attention was that film grain that you have in the first episode. And I was almost, I think it's still there in the second one, but it's a little bit more subdued. Right, you dialed it back. And I was like, oh man, I'm missing it. Like, I enjoyed it. It gave you that gritty feel. I think I was sort of onto what you were trying to do to establish that comic booky feel and texture, and that things are rugged and torn, just like what Star Wars universe is. And I felt I'm missing a little bit of it in the second. I was like, oh man, I hope you brings it back in the third one a little bit. Which I want to talk also about this. Here's my next question for you. Aside from the technical aspect of it, aside from execution and specifics of animation, how do you feel that animation medium differs as a storytelling vehicle from comic books? What is different, and which pros and cons does it have?
Well, takes a lot longer, that's for sure. For every one panel of a comic, you're going to have to draw hundreds of frames probably for animation. So that's definitely one con for sure for doing animation versus comics, that
Hmm.
you can do it far swifter. You can put a lot more time and effort into the nitty gritty details of it. Because if you put everything with hyper details for animation, unless you're a studio like Disney,
Right.
it's going to take a while.
Right. Right. Right.
um, so yeah,
Anything else?
like, oh well, definitely. Well, for starters, with comics, you can stylize things in ways that you can't with animation. Well, technically you can, but it might throw people off.
Yeah, and you have
Like,
to be careful. Yeah.
I think this page right here is great. You have one overall set piece showcasing the Falcon flying down and the kind of planet,
Right.
but speckled in between, in the individual boxes, you see the characters talking to each other, and it's really this whole kind of feeling that you get. With animation, sure, you could have on screen this behind it and these boxes show up in front. Some filmmakers have actually tried it, but it's usually very jarring. You'd have to normally cut to these little moments,
I agree. Yeah.
and that might break pacing. That might just not evoke the same feeling as, because this makes it feel like they're simultaneous. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
that sure you can see the ship, you can see this whole environment, but you can also see them. So you take it as this is all simultaneous. This is just showing what's inside of that,
Right.
and you don't question it for a moment. But if you did that on screen, that would be very jarring. You're going to have to cut in between the two, and so it's just they're different in those kind of ways that you can kind of pull things in the visual manner in which you tell the story that you just can't with video, mostly because of the language that we all know
Right.
of, telling film stories.
Hmm.
Um, and you can get experimental and try these things, but a lot of people just won't like that.
Yeah, I think you basically, to summarize what you're saying, is that there are two different visual languages, and you have to communicate things differently. What works in a
Yeah.
still image would not necessarily work in a moving image. And it was interesting when one of my professors was teaching me at SVA, Matt Sheridan. He was saying, "Look, before you start animating, if you can draw me 5 pictures and tell the entire story in them, you got a story on your hands." If you start like going out of your way and add a panel here, a cut in there, then you lose the audience. You have to be quick, precise, and to the point. And I want to return a little bit to the comic books, and we talked about animation quite a bit. Um, I've read tons of Dark Horse comics from back in the day, but I'm also reading and trying to be on, up with the times and read the Marvel comics. And I noticed the tendency a lot of photographic realism, and I actually did quite a few videos on that, and I've been critical, particularly when they take actors' faces from the films. You recognize those screens, and they paint over them and put them in a comic book panel and call it art. I had a big problem with it. I was quite critical, and my question to you is this. So the art of Star Wars in comics now versus then, the photorealism versus stylized, which one do you prefer? And specifically, what would be your personal message to a first-time comic book person, a young person who's just checking out his first Star Wars book? What's your message to them?
Well, my opinion is that I don't care very much for this photorealistic kind of way of doing it. I think that bringing in an actor's face and using it as like a reference that you then kind of trace over but kind of draw it in a comic booky manner is entirely fine. That's not problematic whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that they are slapping kind of like a filter on it and making it like weirdly painterly, and it's like it's the execution of it that really bothers me, because
Mm-hmm.
you can trace something and it still look very much comic book like. I've done it myself
Right.
very many times, and you can make it look really good, and you can change things like you can change the mouth position, the expression even, but use that reference for structure, and pull it off brilliantly. That what the way they're doing it strikes me as lazy. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that deadlines are intense with comics. That's crazy. The turnout time that people expect is really something else.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that what they're sacrificing for time saving is just not quite worth it, because it's just jarring to see, and I personally am not a fan of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the worst thing though is when you're reading a line and then suddenly they change artists and you were enjoying that story, but now the
Right.
artist's kind of spoiling for you.
Right.
That to me is the worst.
Right.
Um, because there's plenty of good art, in a lot of the modern Star Wars comics. It's just that I think it's one specific artist who's doing it, and I do not care for it.
Right.
I really do not.
I think I singled that person out, actually, now that you're talking about him. I brought his name several times in my reviews. And, I don't want to sound jaded or, it's easy to criticize when you're like,
Oh yeah,
from behind the
it's
screen, you're just
rough with
looking
the
at it.
timeline that they have to do these things in.
Right. But I think I don't know if you would agree with me. I think for the shorter run modern comic books from Marvel, that's where they are rocking it with the art style. Like, for example, Kanan Jarrus, or the TIE Fighter series, which I think ran for, I believe, 5 or 6 issues. You look at those, and that's where the money's at. That's where the gold stuff is. They're able to hire proper artists, and they really spend the time on it,
I haven't read them, so I can't speak to it.
Okay.
Like I've read a decent amount of the mainline Star Wars comics, and
Do you have a favorite?
I liked the Darth Vader series.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was fun. I liked the introduction of like the Dr. Aphra character. I think that she and her droids were a lot of fun.
Right.
I also enjoyed, Luke kind of like, in his kind of between episodes 4 and 5 whole thing, like especially when he got captured by the Hutts. I think that whole bit was fun.
Right.
But yeah, like, there's been plenty of very, very good art in there. It's just that specific artist, his look, I just don't care for it, especially when it's just the characters' faces that are super painterly, but then he goes back to the more traditional matte colors for everything else, including a character's body.
Right.
That to me is extremely jarring, because if you did the painterly for the face, but then the rest of the body is also painterly, that's consistent. I don't understand why anyone would do the face.
I think you hit it
that way.
You hit the nail on it. It's the difference between the styles and it being all over the place and messy, not really adhering and honoring even its own aesthetic, is where things start get problematic. I have, Ian, one more question for you. Then I have a little surprise announcement. And after that, if whatever time you have available, it's really up to you. I really appreciate you coming along and giving me half of your hour. Here's the final question I have. If you had a direct line to Lucasfilm right now, what would be your message to them, and what praise or critique would you give them on the job done so far from 2015 till now? Everything included, comic books, movies, include everything. The Bad Batch, all of it.
Well, I would say that overall, really looking at as a whole, I think that with what they had, with the expectations everyone had for them, that overall it's been a pretty good job. That a lot of the reasons why things didn't quite turn out with some of the sequels was based on knee-jerk reactions to fan reactions, and I think what I'd say is let Dave Filoni run things as much as he can, because whatever he touches is gold. So let him run things as much, like, if he has an idea, let him run with it, because everything he touches with Lucasfilm so far has been pretty much golden. And it seems like whenever they try to stray a little more original, when they try to something a little bit more different, it tends to turn out quite nicely. The Mandalorian was really something else. The Bad Batch has been really great. The last season of Clone Wars was really great. And I know this will be a controversial opinion, but I think The Last Jedi is probably the best sequel film, because it really tried to do something different.
It really is, man. Go for it.
It's far from perfect. There's a whole half of that movie that I don't care for because it doesn't go anywhere. But the other half of that movie is really something special that I really deeply enjoy. And so I think basically all I would say is, with Star Wars, be willing to try something new. And even if people's knee-jerk reaction is that they don't like it, don't spin on your head and immediately go, oh, well,
don't
trash
cave
that or go the other way. Because when you do that, then you guarantee it goes nowhere. You guarantee that you kill it, because then whatever ideas you had that you want to flesh out, they're dead. Because I don't know if everyone remembers, but when the Clone Wars came out and Ahsoka was announced, everyone absolutely hated her as a
I
character.
bring it every time, man. You're absolutely right on it.
They absolutely despised her as a character. Though
Hmm.
it was just this awful little whiny, terrible thing. What, like, this should be just Obi-Wan and Anakin. And now, since they didn't react to fan, like they didn't cave to fan reaction, they actually like, no, we have a plan for this. They went forwards with it. They developed her as a character, and now she's one of
Yeah,
people's most cherished Star Wars characters. Of all of the line of characters since the '70s, a lot of people's favorite character is Ahsoka.
right.
So I personally think that trying to appease fan expectations, making something with specifically trying to appease fans and not just trying to make a really good story, is where things have gone wrong for the entire modern Star Wars era.
Right.
Every single problem seems to stem from trying to just, appease people rather than just trying to make something new.
Yeah.
And whenever they do make something new, it's the stuff that people like.
Yeah. And I think to add to what you're saying is, is that school of thought of the old filmmakers of Lucas and generation before them, and his friend Coppola and the circle of all those directors that graduated together and started making films, is that when those guys came out and were kicking ass strong and making all these films which are now modern class, I mean not modern, they're timeless classics now, it's one man show. I am the director, this is my vision, and I'm not making a movie for you. I hope you will enjoy it, but this is my story. And I wasn't the biggest fan of prequels when they were coming out, but as far as I remember here, at least in East Coast in New York, people weren't protesting with the banners saying cancel, boo George Lucas. People just
Yeah.
didn't genuinely were disappointed and moved on. But I always to this day was and will always respect George Lucas for doing things his way.
Mhm.
Hey, sometimes as a filmmaker, as an artist, you take responsibility and you fall flat on your butt and you fail with your artistic vision. So what? Big deal. Your true fans shouldn't abandon you for that. Big deal. I don't think prequels are the greatest films in the world. There's still things about them that I enjoy, and I don't think he should have been crucified the way he was about them.
Yeah, no.
And Ian, one thing I have for you is this: have you heard of this little thing that's going on right now with the Heart of the Jedi?
I've been hearing some whispers about it. I saw like some posts on Reddit.
Right.
I don't follow a lot of these like EU book publishings really.
Right.
But I've heard a little bit and it sounds nifty.
So
I
just
hear
to
that it's hard to come by now, so you're lucky
right.
to have one.
it's to shed some light on it. This is the author who was actually a published Star Wars short storyteller. He's one part of the anthologies like Tales from the Cantina, from the Empire. He has his short stories there. So he was legit. And there's actually a whole full story behind it, how he was making it for Lucasfilm back in the day, back in 1993. But the deal didn't follow through. Anyway, make the long story short, I snagged a couple of these because I knew they're going to disappear. I got like 20 or so pieces in there. If you're a reader of EU, I would love to send you a copy. See what you think of it. I'm reading it right now, man. It's like I'm trying to do a raffle, kind of like it spread the word, get some traction on my channel, but also excite the fans and share the book with them. And since you were so gracious to come over, I would like to send you a copy.
Yeah, that'd be great. Like, I've got my little small budding EU collection. I've started reading the X-Wing books, and I've got the Thrawn trilogy that I'm working my way through. So, yeah, absolutely, that'd be great.
Nice, man. Yeah, I'm currently also in book number 2 of the X-Wing. It's one of the few Legends books I still haven't read. The Wedge's Gamble. That's the one I'm reading right now. Stackpole is amazing, man.
Oh yeah, I reading those books really got me hyped for the Star Wars Squadrons game.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, I have yet to play it. I picked it up. My younger brother got me.
It's something else.
I got to check
the whole
it
idea
out.
of like in the books you read about like space drifting and whatnot, and you can do that in the game, so it's a lot of fun.
What's interesting? Maybe you can answer this question for me. Like just comparing notes, if you don't mind. I'm obviously English is my second language. I natively speak Russian. I came here when I was 14. And at first, it was really intimidating reading science fiction novels, but I started with Star Wars because I had to force myself to read. To this day, when I read Stackpole's novels, I adore them. I love them. But every time he starts describing like dogfighter maneuvers, except for basics like starboard and port, and word terminology like this, I get confused. Like, what's happening dimensionally? Does it ever happen to you?
Sometimes I have to rewind and read back through it a little, um, but it doesn't confuse me that badly. I think I just have to give I just have to give it the time to kind of sit and acknowledge exactly and try like visualize in my head. Okay, if he's here and that was there, and then he says that he did this, that
Right,
puts
right.
it. And I have to. It takes a little bit of like mental gymnastics, but I don't know. I think ultimately, even though it takes, at least for me, maybe I'm just not that bright,
Yeah.
but it takes me a little time sometimes to wrap my head around all of it. But it's usually worth it to give it the time to sit there and really think about it and then
Hmm.
visualize it because then it pays off. Because that's kind of like, it's all build up of, okay, if he did this and he goes there, and you just kind of mentally visualize it, it usually pays off.
So you
But
just
yeah,
lifted
no, it is confusing.
you lifted
It's
a
a little
rock from my
rough.
shoulders. I'm glad to know I'm not the only one.
Yeah, no, it's not a language barrier thing. It's just that it's dense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Ian, once again, thank you so much. We're at 7 o'clock right now. If you have anything else you'd like to add, please remind people where to go to see your shorts, your channel, and when can they possibly expect episode 3.
Oh yeah, the channel's Wilkins Animations. I also do some doodles on Instagram at Spiky Tortoise Comics.
Awesome.
And well, if you want to see updates and whatnot, if you want to support the project, because money for the project, it helps pay for all the stuff I mentioned before, getting 3D models made, and I'm hoping to find some 3D animators because
Hmm.
it's not cheap, so that'll take a big chunk of the budget. But hey, that's what the money's for. If you want to support the project, it's Wilkins Animations on Patreon, and that's where you can see, the first glimpses at things. Whenever I make anything, I post it there, so you can see storyboards and work in progress. I do polls, anyways. And you can do it for just like $1 a month. Any
Right.
any amount helps. But yeah, so that's where anyone can see like progress on the project. And the episode I'm aiming for December.
Hmm.
Um, that's what I did for the last one, and ultimately it took a little bit longer.
Right.
But I'd rather put out something I'm happy with than rush it. But
Hmm.
that's roughly where I'm aiming for between December and March. Um, so let's hope for December.
Right. Ian, one more time, thank you so much for coming over. I'll after we finish this interview, I'll get the links all from you. I'll throw them right in the video so people can constantly see it, come visit you, and hopefully I'll get at least a little bit of traffic if it helps to your channel. And once again, it's
And it helps.
thank you so much for having me, coming over and talk. Anytime, you're more than welcome here. If you have a free 10 minutes, I'll be more than happy to oblige. Thanks a lot,
Yeah.
man. Take
Hey, my
care.
pleasure.
Have a good one.
You too.
All right, I guess we're done. It was
Nice.
so cool to see your interaction with Peter Harmey, and I appreciate your
Oh
time,
yeah.
man.
Oh yeah. It was my pleasure. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, also thanks for the book. That's going to be really cool.
No, no, no. Yeah. Also, if you don't mind, if that's okay, just give me the address where to send it,
Yeah,
and I'll
yeah,
send you a
sure
copy of it.
thing. Especially since supposedly they're going to be like super rare or something.
Yeah, the moment I saw that Amazon listing, because it kind of was self-published, but you knew that it's not really legal. It's a bootleg, basically, that was
Yeah.
meant to happen but didn't go through. Because I'm reading it right now, and it's a little bit rougher on the edges in terms of editing, because you could tell it's not a complete. It's a professional work, but it's not a complete work.
Charts are still very much a thing.
That's
I
what
work
they
at a
call them,
traditional.
charts.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Basically, showing how things are going and whatnot. Like
Hmm.
the charts are still very much a part of the 2D animation process at the studio I work at. I, on the other hand, don't really use them in my personal project because it's well, at least for me, I in my head know where it's going to go, and at the studio, the reason for the charts mostly is just so that if it gets passed off to another animator and someone needs to tweak it, people know where the keys are and they know where it needs to ease in and ease out.
Right, right.
Um, so it's more of like it exists for the collaborative element and to be able to read the animation if someone else needs to work on it. But for me personally, I don't really need them.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I mean, because looking at the way that things have evolved from episode 1 to 10, I mean it in the most sincerest way, Ian. Like, you have knocked yourself out. I'm looking at those like key frames, the key poses, then in between, so like it became smoother. There is a lot of emotion behind the characters, and I know how much of a pain in the ass. The lip syncing is so many students in my school were half-assing it, man. And my professor told me, Ben, if you nailed this, you will bring so much character to your characters.
Well, thanks. Thankfully, like like I haven't really had like I do a lot of the lip syncing just by by well, I scrub over the sound. I hear it sounds like an sound. I just draw an A, and it works.
Yeah,
Gets the job done.
yeah.
I know you're supposed to probably chart it out and like
Yeah,
write
you're
down
supposed
what
to
we're
chart it
doing.
out, and for every vowel, like you put the
Yeah,
drawing. Oh my god, it's
you're supposed to.
yeah,
But I just I do it on the fly.
yeah,
And like at the studio I work at, depending on the type, because they do traditional and they also do cutout.
mm-hmm,
With cutout, it's that you've got like all your pre-made mouths, and they
mm-hmm,
swap in and out.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, but I think it always looks nicer when it's all done by hand. But that's just me personally. It's a different aesthetic.
Yeah, it is. It is. I did one of the pieces that I did for my third year was a cutout animation based on the artwork and a popular American artist, Carl Walker. So I experimented with. I did it all in Flash, but it was basically principally it was cutout animation. I basically made puppets with like all the points and everything. But anyway, man, you're doing kick-ass job. You're a voice for 2D animators. I'm like, oh, like it's a pleasure, man, and good luck with
Oh yeah.
everything. I can't
Oh,
wait to see
thanks.
episode 3.
Yeah, me too.
Good luck on that, man.
Well, thank you very much.
Take care. Thanks so much,
Yeah,
man.
I'll send you all of the details.